Today we're going to be looking at a new model, Sonnet 4.6. So this is a exciting one. It's a new version of Anthropic's Sonnet model, which has been a long favorite for a lot of developers up until Opus has really stole the scene with big price reductions and so on. So it's really interesting to see how well would Sonnet really catch up to Opus or not. So what we're going to be looking at today is a bunch of different generations. They're all going to be quite visual. So we're going to have 3D generations, we're going to have SVG generations. And the reason why we want to look at those is that it's a nice, quick visual way for us to understand a few things. One is coherence of the scene. We really want to see if the scene that is put together is adhering to the instructions, that it's aligned with what our expectations are, that in a complex generation, in a one-shot generation, it is able to combine different elements that we're looking for. Or is it messing things up and generating something good on one side, but it doesn't match the other side? So we're going to see a few of those examples. We'll look at Sonnet 4.6 here, but also we'll look at Opus 4.6 as a good comparison to see if it reaches up to that. And then we'll also have GLM 5 as the kind of open source benchmark and see if how close they are. And the exciting thing would be if open source models really catch up, or it could be that closed source models like Sonnet are really getting away. So let's take a look. So the first one we've got is a Stonehenge generation. I really like this generation from Sonnet here. So what we can do is play with different elements. I really like the coherence. It's sort of kind of close to the real one versus GLM 5 here, for example. This does not really match the realistic image, the real Stonehenge here. Gemini 3 Pro is not quite great generation here, but Opus 4.6 is really good. So this versus this, maybe you're gonna give slight edge to Opus just because of the scene is more realistic with the wider environment. I quite like the green grass, the reflection here. So maybe a slight mental note towards Opus. But Stonehenge by Sonnet, I would say, is definitely the second one here. So let's keep looking at others. So for example, Petra is the next one, which is quite interesting. So this is the famous monument in Jordan, and we've got Opus here again, excellent. Gemini 3 Pro, really good. Another one by Opus, which is really great. GLM is kind of not bad, but it doesn't really match the real thing. But it's sort of not bad. We can see the outlines and so on, which is quite good. And I would say Sonnet is looking much better to me than GLM in this case. But does it match up to Opus here? Maybe not quite. We can see what I was talking about coherence is that the things are not connected together. So the way if you don't care about the 3D generations, which most of us don't, the interesting thing about this, if you give it a prompt, would it actually be able to put it together in the way that you want? Whether you're building a database, data visualization, or some architecture in your app or something like that, that's the kind of proxy for it. Could it coherently put things together? And I would say as this kind of proxy here, Opus seems to be ahead on that. Now a fun generation here. So this is the Gemini 3 generation of the SpongeBob world. And again, what we're really trying to do here is to really test the diversity. So we are not just anchoring on one thing, but for example, its ability to generate kind of very realistic. Patrick here is like a little bit failed, but the Opus generation looks really good to me. If we now look at the Sonnet one, the kind of weird thing here is that the flaws kind of disappeared, right? We haven't really seen this with other ones, even GLM 5, even though the scene is less rich, the flaw is here. So it's like a little failures like this that we can see that Opus doesn't seem to be doing here with this generation. So that's a really great Opus generation. But a little bit Sonnet is a little bit behind. But I would say if you ignore the flaw missing versus GLM, you can see how less rich it is. And again, what we're learning from this is that it seems to be that Opus is really very rich, very coherent. All the things coming together nicely, maybe not perfectly. You can see something happened to Patrick here, but something's little bit lacking in the Sonnet generation, but better than the GLM one. So let's keep going. Let's take a look at a few more in here. So this is Cherry Blossom, Opus 4.6. Let me jump to Sonnet. That looking rather lovely here. So yeah, that looks really good to me. We can see time of day. I really like how that changes. Yeah, I would say really good generation. Some kind of coherence issues. You can see the bridge is kind of off to the side. So that's the kind of coordination between different elements that I'm looking for as well in a really good generation. Let's just see. Oh yeah, another one by Opus. Yeah, and this Opus is actually not looking that great here. Cool. So let's take a look at something different. So this is a endless run kind of. It's a kind of not quite a coherent game, but it does have some controls. So Opus is slightly glitchy, or rather Gemini 3 Pro here is a little bit glitchy, but it does work. Opus 4.6, I would say it does feel like more beautiful and less glitchy, so that feels like a win. And you can see there's some actual points, so a little bit of a gameplay here, although not the most fun game. GLM here, oh geez, the performance is really bad here, so maybe I'll just switch that off. And if I would say Sonnet, is it going in the wrong direction? Yeah, you can see it's like, I would say performance is better than, I guess it's hard to tell which direction it's going, but it's a little bit weird. Anyway, there's no real gameplay here, right? So this is versus Opus. I would say it's kind of on par maybe with Gemini 3 here, but below Opus. So I would say that's the kind of theme that we're seeing with a bunch of these. Acropolis, Opus really good generation. Gemini 3 Pro like pretty good, but a little bit not quite aligning with reality. GLM kind of like decent, but not really matching. Here I would say it's okay. The obvious thing is the roof is out, but if you just ignore that part, it's kind of the scene feels more complete. But again, it's kind of, I would say, closer to Gemini 3 level than Opus 4.6. That's the kind of vibe that I'm getting from this. Let's see, I think that was a pretty cool one. So this is the Opus generation here. So the idea here is that the hawk needs to fly in and kind of get the birds moving here. This is the Gemini 3. Oh, it's giving me a bit of a headache. Yeah, with GLM, it's not really working, right? Kind of don't see any flock here, but the hawk is flying, so it's kind of poor. And then hawk, is a flock hawk gonna fly in? So again, I think that's the kind of theme that we're seeing, is that it seems to be a little bit lacking in that coherence element. So for example, what we saw with Opus, there's a visualization maybe just as beautiful as each other, I would say, so that has quite a good taste. But if you release the hawk with Opus, the birds fly away, right? So that's the kind of the interesting element around it. And that's what I mean by the coordination between the different elements. In here, if you release the hawk, birds don't care, which is, which again, not that you particularly care about this specific generation, but the coherence between different two elements of the code base, I think that's a nice proxy for whatever real apps you might be building. And let's just have a look at some slightly more silly ones in here as well. So SVGs is another one of those that people have been generating that are quite easy to have a quick feel for the coordination. So in here, a really perfect SVG would be the pedals, the legs being kind of coordinating with the pedals. Again, that's the kind of complexity. Opus here, similar kind of issue, but it's pretty good. So got few opuses here. JLM here is actually not that bad, but again, this kind of coordination, the legs are really kind of a little bit missing. This kind of a cool one actually, like the bike is quite nice. Like if you see versus others, does feel like it's a bit different, but obviously, no, the person is not really there. So again, if you compare to like Opus seems to be quite a bit better. If you look at rocket launch, so Gemini 3 Pro, we've got Opus 4.6. I think it flew away. Let me just unfire to JLM. So that's actually quite a nice one. And then Sonnet, oh no. So you see kind of slight miscoordination. So again, the kind of feeling that I'm picking up is that the actual visuals, I would bet, is probably quite good at front-end UI, but the coordination between different elements seems to be its weaker point. So let's see. So Opus again, F1 looks like really superb here. JLM is a little bit funny, but you know, it kind of comes together. And then Sonnet, it's not bad, but yeah, there are things floating around. Again, not the best one here. So I like this dog generation just because it has a few different elements. What I really like about this one is actually creating a little fur here almost. So that's quite cool. I haven't seen anyone do that. So we can see versus others. I would say again with Opus, the scene is more complete for most of them, but I kind of like this element. That was not a bad one. So in summary, what I would say is that just as a vibe check in terms of the kind of capabilities that it probably has in the real world utility, that it seems to be really good, seems to be close to kind of maybe, I would probably guess, even though we didn't do the comparison here, maybe to Opus 4.5. But if you're comparing to Opus 4.6, it doesn't really match up. So it's kind of really good, maybe as of like a month ago or so. But if you're comparing now, if you can use Opus, you're probably better off doing that. But it's certainly ahead. At least we use JLM here as a proxy, which seems to be one of the best open source coding models. It's really still quite a bit ahead of those on these sorts of tests at least. So overall, seems like a nice iterative update. It's certainly cheaper. I think it's probably, I think from memory, maybe it's like half the price of Opus, but the difference between price used to be much bigger. So again, if you can use Opus, you're probably better off using Opus. There's probably not any particular reason to switch to Sonnet for coding tasks, but it feels like a really nice update nevertheless.